Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody, this is Bridgit Danner with Hormone Detox Shop, and my guest today is Dr. Rishma Walji.
You got it.
Hailing from Toronto, and she's got a busy women's health practice there in Toronto, but she's moving also more online. So we're going to have a conversation today about your hormones at 40 and all the various things that you could be potentially, experiencing, or maybe you're still trying to get pregnant at 40. Maybe you've just recently gotten married and you're, making a family at 40, or maybe you're just noticing some changes in your hormones. Like I mentioned to Rishma earlier, I definitely have had a lot of changes in my hormones after 40. So, well, first of all, welcome, Rishma.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, let's get into things. Maybe you can give us kind of a big picture on female hormones, and I like to kind of look at it the whole arc from like puberty to menopause. And so where are we when we're sort of moving into 40, and then what happens afterwards?
Yeah, so the hormones actually change quite a lot over if you're thinking about from puberty all the way to 40. Your hormones change, your cycles are different if you have had a regular cycle versus at the beginning when you're still kind of learning about the hormone changes. You've kind of gone through your reproductive years understanding your body. So I find a lot of women are more in tune with what's normal for them. That doesn't mean that they're in tune with what's normal generally. So I do find a lot of women who come in their late 30s, early 40s will have an understanding of their own bodies and how their hormones work and what their PMS is like. In terms of what's right for them, but maybe not what would be normal in a healthcare setting. So for example, I've had women come in and, I ask very detailed questions about periods. Like we just have no TMI in my office. And so I'll ask very detailed questions and then I'll find out that they bleed every time after sex. And they just thought that was normal because that's how it was for 20 years, And so I find a lot of women will really understand more so their bodies, but not necessarily what's the difference between normal and not normal or what could be optimized, so to speak. But then when you get to the 40s or, approaching 40s, and I find it happens younger and younger. I used to see in my practice many years ago where it would be like late 40s, early 50s, things would change. But I'm finding that it happens a lot sooner now, where we notice changes in our bodies. Maybe we're noticing the periods getting closer together or getting further apart, or change in flow in terms of how much there is, whether it's lighter or heavier for some women. So that becomes really confusing because it's like you've had this period for so long, you kind of know it, and now it's all of a sudden changing and you're having to sort of start all over again, almost like puberty backwards. You're trying to figure yourself out again. So I find that can be really disconcerting for a lot of women because they live busy lives, or they're working, or they're looking after kids, and they're trying to figure themselves out again.
Yeah. What are the actual like complaints that are driving them to make an appointment with you? Is it like the heavy periods or things being irregular? Or is it more like mood or pain, or I guess it could be things?
I would say most of the time when people would make an appointment, it's because they've had some sort of issue that's concerning to them. Because like I said, if they've had PMS their whole life, they're not going to think it's anything unusual. But let's say they've had an abnormal PAP, or they've had, really unusually heavy periods or unusually light periods. Most people don't complain about, but it's different from what they used to have.
Okay.
Or maybe they're having hot flashes, or they're trying to get pregnant and they've noticed changes in their hormones and they're worried that maybe that'll impact their fertility. So it's usually a change versus something that they were used to in their 30s. I also find some women will come to me after they've gone off the pill. So say they've been on the pill for 15, 20 years, and now they're thinking about either changing their hormones or trying to get on top of their hormones, or if it's a fertility issue, they've gone off the period and now their hormones are completely different than what they're used to and they don't understand what's going on.
Okay, so there's a change. It's kind of shocking to them in some ways, is kind of what's driving them in. And yeah, I agree with your point about it. Well, it's kind of sad and scary that it's happening younger, even in your like 15-year practice. But yeah, we did a summit, I guess, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, about hormone balance after 40, but mostly everyone who joined was around 50, because I think still there's a lack of awareness that this does start to happen like much sooner. Hopefully it's happening subtly, but it could be happening, pretty dramatically. I think, yeah, probably with increased stress and toxicity. And we'll probably talk about some of those factors.
Absolutely. Yes. And I find it's concerning because when we get to 40, we're like, I'm too young for all this to happen. Because in our mind, we think it should happen much later.
Yeah. And I find that women in this age are usually pretty busy. They've got careers and kids and a lot going on. So sometimes health is a little bit back burner when it really needs to probably be front burner to prevent things from getting, more off balance. So
yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you're noticing this too, but I find a lot of women at this age also have very aging parents who are having their own health problems. So that creates an additional stress because they've already have a lot of commitments and demands on them, but then they also have aging parents. And so that's another trigger that I find is very stressful and kind of throws your body off.
Yeah, I think that that's happening more like as we have children later, and like that's happening in my life right now. I have a 10-year-old son and a father-in-law dying of cancer, and
oh, I'm sorry.
It's all good. Like we want to support everyone in our lives, but and luckily I have a more flexible schedule now than I used to. But a lot of women are going into the office. They're gone 50 hours a week, and that's tough. So I mentioned people having families later. And I know that a lot of women at 40 are still looking to conceive. Yeah. So I wonder, and that's one of your specialties. I wonder if you can talk about what a woman at this age may want to be especially aware of if she's trying to conceive.
So there's a few different things. I find you want to make sure that you're getting all your nutrients. A lot of women, again, if you're busy or if you're not as aware of what nutrients your body needs, because as you age, your cells kind of get older, your eggs are getting older. So you really want to maintain that quality of the eggs and also the quality of your uterine environment. So a lot of it is nutrition, especially if you're busy and stressed and running around. It's hard to make sure that you're getting all the nutrients. The other thing is the digestion and the gut health and all of that, because that plays a really big role with hormone health. And the other big thing we've already mentioned, but it's stress, because the cortisol really will change your hormone balance, and that can really impact fertility as well. And then the other hormone that we don't tend to talk about in reproductive circles, but it's really important for reproduction, is thyroid. And I find a lot of women will have thyroid issues as they approach the 30s and 40s, and they might not notice it. It might come on gradually, but they start getting symptoms of hair loss or weight gain or things like that. And they think, oh, my metabolism's slowing down, which may be the case. But oftentimes it's also thyroid related, which is something that I usually look into. And I was thinking also, although a lot of my audience is fertility and they're still trying to have babies, but I find even after having a baby, let's say you have a toddler, let's say you've had your kid in your 30s and now you're approaching 40, or you're just past your 40s, you still have a young child. And so if you think about, back in the generations where our parents would have their kids at 20, they would reach their 40s or 50s and their kids would be grown and, independent. Whereas we in our society, we don't have that. We still have to nurture our kids. We still have to take care of them when we're going through our own transitions. So it's harder to become, I like to take a positive view on hormones and reproductive. I think a lot of, in Western society, we're very negative about our period. But if you think about the way the transition happens, in that stage where you're going through the pre-menopausal or perimenopausal years, in theory, you're supposed to embrace your wisdom and, the fact that you've learned so much over the years and you have all this, knowledge, and you're almost, you're supposed to kind of come into your own, but then you're taking care of a kid who needs your nurturing. So that's a whole different phenomenon as well. And I think requires a different level of self-care.
Yeah. And I think that great you brought that up, just to even start with that awareness, because I think in our culture, we're very kid oriented, and you have to be a little more me oriented, get a babysitter, you're in control of your own time, and it can be challenging. I totally get it. But you need to make the time, ask your partner for help, get a babysitter, get a delivery service, what makes your life easier.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And although I'm guilty of it sometimes too with my own kids, but I feel like we also have a lot of guilt, I can't leave my kid but when we do that and we take time for ourselves, your child also will learn independence and will learn about what it is to care for themselves when they're older, So I think there's this
Yeah,
balance
you're
between like,
modeling a healthy.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I've been listening to this new podcast called Rise Together, and
Yes.
do you know
Rachel
about it?
Hollis.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I just started listening. So she has the one on date nights that I just listened to, and I was like, this is so great. So I have a babysitter for tomorrow because, we're also guilty, like, just not getting a babysitter often
Yes.
enough and that kind of
Yeah.
a thing. So I think it's really great. And yeah, it's just a change of mindset. So a lot of things you mentioned are also good for just hormone balance beyond
You got
fertility,
it.
which
Yeah.
works out great for this conversation.
Yes.
So that's great. So if you're experiencing, well, I want to talk a little bit more about what happens hormone wise and with your eggs and all that as you age. So I was sharing with you before we got on that I'm 44 and I've really noticed changes in my hormones in this decade. It probably frankly did start in my late 30s, but really kind of taking charge of it now. So I just want people to understand a little bit about why hormone changes happen physiologically with aging. Like what exactly is going on? Can you help me?
Yeah, so trying to figure out how to explain it sort of, in a simple way, but like your cycle is basically a constellation of different hormones, right? And so you have like the rise of estrogen, and then you have an LH surge, which is when you ovulate, and then you have this like progesterone time phase of your cycle. And so your eggs are releasing every month, hopefully if you have a regular cycle. And over time, because your body has now released as many eggs as it has, or the ovaries may not be responding in the same way, it kind of takes time. And as you approach the sort of, I don't like to say the end of your eggs, but basically like as your eggs start to run out, or they're maybe not as responsive, things like that, your body realizes that, hey, you know what, now we're not into the reproductive years anymore. We're now into a different transition period. And so your hormones don't stimulate the processes in the same way that they would have when you were trying to get pregnant every month, or your body was ready to get pregnant if that was what you were planning to do. And so your body sort of shifts. And then the other thing that we tend not to talk about, although that's where the cycle sort of happens with the monthly cycle, but there's also the actual cellular aging. So all the other cells in your body are getting older, and so the genetics are changing. You're reproducing more cells each time. You know how they turn over, like you get new skin cells, that kind of thing. So your cells are sort of turning over time. And as that process happens, your genetic information understands that the cells are on this earth for only so long. And so at some point, they start to break down and not be able to repair themselves as easily. And so when I talk to women, I kind of use the metaphor of like trying to slow down your biological clock, because we're trying to, allow reproductive or fertility to happen in the later years, but also to be healthier and allow you to have healthy life even beyond the reproductive years. And so does that answer your question about sort of what happens over time?
Yeah. I'll sort of mention too, as you release sort of a weaker egg or ovulate less often, usually the first drop that happens is less progesterone. Like that's a pretty, in your 40s, a pretty strong drop, because that egg that in your 20s was, really rocking and making lots of hormones.
Yes.
After it released, it made a lot of progesterone. So now as our eggs are older, some of the aging that we talked about, and the body programming is changing, that egg sometimes doesn't get released at all, even if you had a period and you think, oh, my period's normal. Sometimes it's not released at all, or sometimes it's just an egg that's just not performing as well. So it's not putting out as much progesterone, which can make for estrogen dominance, which a lot of women say that they have or think they have. It's true, but it's often not for the reasons that they think. When we run labs, we very rarely, I can't think if I even have seen it. We don't, like, I've seen it once. Like, we rarely see true high estrogen. We just see everything's low and the progesterone's really tanked out. So that can mean heavier periods, or in my case, it's really hits me for PMS. Progesterone also helps you make some brain chemicals that make you feel happy and relaxed. So if you find that your PMS is worsening, some women feel like they're in a bad mood all the time, even in this stage of life, it's hard and it can affect your relationship. So having some awareness of this hormonal change And how can I, like you said, even if you don't want to get pregnant, in a sense, you want to keep your reproductive health as strong as possible, because it's sort of your youth, and it's like protective. So I think that that's an important thing to bring up. And then just an awareness of that hormonal change. And then, okay, what can we do about it? What can we do about it with detox? What can we do about it with nutrition and supplements? And you know all about that stuff. So let's move into some like, what would be your top advice for someone in their 40s who just wants to have balanced, healthy hormones?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of advice. I just wanted to mention, though, something that you said, and I'm really glad you brought up the estrogen dominance, because I do find it's more of a proportion issue as opposed to just like so much estrogen. It's really more a proportion issue. But I also joke with some of my patients where I say, like, if you had a hard time through PMS during your reproductive years, you're going to have like a perma PMS feeling during menopause. So if you're still getting periods, it's a good idea to kind of balance out the hormones then before you go into the menopausal years, because that shift really does make a difference. And I find that people will struggle through those transition years a little bit more if they're having problems throughout their period cycle.
Okay, that makes sense.
I've noticed that clinically.
Okay.
In terms of balancing out the hormones, there's a few different things that I think we don't tend to realize just on a day-to-day basis that really make a difference. And the first thing is, of course, what we ingest, right? Like, so nutrition, water, that kind of thing. It sounds really basic, but I find a lot of times we just go through our day not having just the basics like water. Water really helps to circulate the circulation, the blood. It helps to hydrate you. And so when you don't have that water, it really makes a difference. And so a lot of times the flow will not be as good, or it'll be more painful if you're not hydrated. And the other thing is, although we talk a lot about water, and I'm always trying to remind people to drink water, I'm reminding myself, but I think we also don't realize the effect on dehydration factors in our life. So if you're busy and you're drinking a lot of coffee, or you're having stimulants, tea, whatever the case may be, they dehydrate you. And so as much as you might say, yeah, I'm drinking a couple glasses of water, if you're also drinking a couple cups of coffee, they're not going to be, it's not going to have the same effect. I basically tell people to think about it simply. You're going to cancel them out. Like one cup of coffee will cancel out a cup of water, as an example, just to kind of have an easy way to think about it. So I encourage people to think about their circulation, not just with the water, but also with the other things that they're drinking that could negatively impact their hydration.
So if you have like 5 glasses of water a day, but like 3 cups of tea, you really only had like 2 glasses of water.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
I want to tell you a funny story that I haven't told in a while about water. Once I broke down in my car and I got a tow truck driver to take me like 45 minutes home. Is a woman, and she said she couldn't remember the last time she had drinking water.
Oh my gosh.
She only drinks Mountain Dew and coffee. That's it. I was just like, I should have lectured her, maybe, but I just was like, yes, I don't even know how we got in this conversation.
I feel like if everyone just drank more water, like half the health problems in the world would just be gone, because nobody drinks water. Every time I do a lecture in front of an audience and I'm like, 70% of the population is dehydrated, and like I see a sea of people reaching out for their water bottles and it's like having a sip.
It's a good reminder. I know some people are really good about drinking water, but for me, I really I do best when I really count it out.
Yes.
That helps too. So anyway, I'll let you go on.
Yeah, I have lots of tricks for water too, because I forget myself. You just get busy. So definitely the water. The other one is, of course, the nutrients and what you're eating. And there's so many fad diets and, hormone diets and all these things that are out there. But I find for most people, it's really overwhelming. And especially when you approach the 40s, a lot of women will notice, as I said, like their metabolism slows down, or they feel like they're gaining weight, or they're struggling with their weight. And if that's the case, what I usually focus on is their nutrient intake. And so a lot of women will say, well, I have to cut down, my carbs, or I have to go on this fad diet, or whatever the case may be. But if you just shift your thinking, because that can be really overwhelming, right? Like now you're worried about what you're eating and when and how much. And so I feel like if you just shift your thinking to nutrient density, as opposed to, what should I have for breakfast, lunch, dinner? Just think about how many nutrients you're getting in your day. So each meal, just, bump up the nutrients. So if you're having, something with your breakfast, let's say something simple, like you're having your coffee and toast or whatever, something super simple. If you're trying to make it healthier, add some avocado and some spinach and, add more nutrition. And then as you start to feel more comfortable with increased nutrients, then you can start decreasing the what people call empty carbs, where like they're less nutrient dense foods. And if that is your way of thinking, you'll end up reducing sugar because cookies have no nutritional value. You'll end up reducing, your amount of pasta because you're having, more vegetables with your pasta and less pasta, and instead of just having like, just a pasta with no vegetables. So if you think about the nutrient density, you'll start to add foods in, which I think is a little bit more it's easier for people to kind of get their heads around instead of always feeling restricted, like you have to take everything out. So definitely fresh fruits and vegetables and whole foods and, things that are not processed and no sugar, like all of those kinds of things are really, really important. Good fats, those are things that everyone has a worry around fat, like can't eat too much fat, but a cookie and an avocado are very different foods, even though they both have fat, right?
Yeah. All calories are not created equal, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other thing I find, that a lot of times your hormones and your period symptoms will be impacted by what you eat. So interestingly, I notice in my practice, a lot of women in January will come in and have a horrible period. Have you ever noticed this? And it's because over the holidays or over December, they're just eating all the junk food. They're going to parties and things like that. And then their period in January turns out to be horrible. And that's how much of a difference it makes when you're eating well versus when you're not.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't talk about this enough, but I do think that things like keto and stuff, they're not going to be as talked about in 5 years or whatever, but there is a value in reducing your processed food and simple carbs that can come with keto. I'm a little cautious about taking out so many vegetables and fruits, though, that do have those micronutrients. I mostly believe in the theory, like we need to get all our micro and macronutrients. The macros can change around a bit, but we need those little vitamins, like B vitamins are super important for your period. Yeah, all the fats are, I think, like critical, especially as you age and you want to manufacture as many hormones as you can. Yeah. So that's good advice. Okay, so we have water.
I actually agree with that. And just one more thing to add to that. I think a lot of people do focus on protein or the protein value in the body. And yes, certainly protein is good for muscles and muscle building and all that stuff. You don't want to be low in protein. But one, I feel like we don't need as much protein as we think we do. But also, if you're not getting the vegetables, like vegetables have all the cofactors. If you think about the biochemistry of your body and the chemical processes that happen in your body to create energy, to process foods, to work on bones, like all of these things require these what we call cofactors, which are, minerals and vitamins, as you mentioned, B's and calcium and things like that. And those come from vegetables primarily, not as much from protein. And so that's another reason why I'm also cautious about cutting out the vegetables, in particular, the vegetables.
Yeah. Okay. What else you got for us?
So the other thing is I usually tell people to try to detox their environment. So I know that's something that you think about as well, quite a lot. It gets overwhelming for people. So I try to kind of start with one thing at a time. I find the detox world is very intimidating for people when they first start thinking about it. And also the environmental impact, although we all know that, plastics are bad for the environment and things like that, changing your day-to-day life can be very difficult for a lot of people, especially if you don't know where to start. And so usually I will tell people to start with one change. So if you just stop using plastic bags or, something like that, if you're using an environmental lens, but also just think about what that environmental toxin does to your own body and also to the body of the next generation. So all of the future children and, like they're getting their periods really early compared to when we got our periods or when our parents got their periods, so there's a lot of hormonal changes. I was reading some articles on how a researcher was doing research on breast cancer, and she was looking at the estrogen effect on breast cancer cells, and something happened that kind of messed up her research. And it turned out that the plastic that she was using to test the cells, or the new plastic she had gotten, really was releasing a lot of estrogen into her cells and damaging the results. So she noticed a change as she changed the plastic, and she realized that, plastic are everywhere, and they have these estrogen-like chemicals that can impact your body. So
she was using the plastic how, like in testing or
in a petri dish? Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess she changed it halfway through and realized that it was impacting the results and figured it out.
Wow.
And then started writing articles on environmental impact of plastics because she realized how predominant they are,
Yeah.
which I thought
Yeah.
was really interesting. Yeah. So I think the detoxing in the environment is really important. A lot of people say, well, I was exposed to all these toxins. How do I get rid of it? It's very hard to get rid of toxins that you've already been exposed to. Some of them are around for years and years and years in your body, and it's very hard to get rid of. It doesn't mean they can never go away, but sometimes, especially the persistent chemicals that are out there, they take years and years to get rid of. And so I usually tell people to try to focus just on prevention. And I do find the younger generation is more aware of environmental toxins and things like that. But even just small things like carrying around your own cup or using reusable bags or changing your personal hygiene products, that I find is really hard for some people because they're used to their products. So even just changing one product at a time and just experimenting with different things and seeing, I ran out of my shampoo, which one can I use that's a little cleaner and less harsh? Or, I ran out of my toilet cleaner or whatever I'm using for my house, what can I buy that's a little more clean for the environment and also then would be cleaner for me to use to actually clean the house. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I was just learning some pretty scary stuff. I'm taking an environmental health course right now, and we're talking about like transgenerational
Yes.
toxin
The
effects,
impact.
which is beyond, as I'm learning the definition now, is beyond your grandkids. It's generations after that, the way that it's affected your genetic expression. So it's pretty crazy. Not to say that there's no hope or we shouldn't try to detox our body, but it's a sad truth that some of our exposure we can't quite get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to affect things. So yeah, you can just do your best to change your environment. This little by little is kind of
Yeah.
what I
I
preach.
agree with
Okay.
that. Yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
that. And if you're not going through fertility challenges, there are things you can do. Like you can take, herbs to help your liver detoxification mechanisms, or you can, go into a sauna and kind of sweat out your toxins. There's a few different mechanisms. What I usually tell my patients is there's a few different mechanisms in your body that get rid of toxins. So if of course, prevention is, the key. But if you're trying to get rid of stuff that you already have in your body, there's a few places where you can do that. So breathing is one of them. Your lungs kind of exchange, oxygen and toxins. It gets rid of all the toxins. So of course the deep breathing, but just in your air, you want to reduce scents and fragrances and any kind of chemicals that you might be breathing in. So that's one way to detox your body. Another one is through your urine. So of course the water plays a role here, but also staying hydrated and also making sure that you're minimizing the weight on the kidneys, so to speak. So if you're just having, for example, protein and no water, that's really hard on the kidneys. Or
Oh,
if you're,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, if you're, it plays a role in the filtration. And so if you're having a lot of caffeine or you're drinking Mountain Dew all the time, it's a different kind of toxin or a different kind of weight on your kidneys. So if you think about the fact that you're flushing out, even if you just think about what color your urine is or how often you're having to go. I have this issue with a lot of my patients who are teachers or who work in an environment where they're always with other people and they can't escape to go to the bathroom, or they have to find
True.
someone to
So
watch
they
their
don't drink.
classroom
Yeah.
and then they're like, I can't drink the water because I can't leave my class full of kids. So this is a real challenge to kind of get around that, because that is a really big way you detoxify a lot of things. The other one is your bowels, of course. So if you're not having a bowel movement every single day that's full and that you feel like you've actually evacuated everything, that's a really good clue that you're not getting rid of stuff. And that's actually a way that your body reabsorbs certain toxins if you're not flushing it out through the bowels. And of course, the gut health and microflora, like all the bacteria, the good bacteria in your digestive system, those play a really big role in detoxifying your body. So the bowels are a huge, huge area of detoxification that I tell people to focus on. And that's where I focus on fiber and, healthy foods, but also making sure the bowels are working really, really well. And then
Yeah.
the other one is skin. A lot of people don't realize your skin is a detoxifier as well, right? So if you have eczema or you're having dry skin or anything like that, that could be an indicator that your body is trying to get rid of something that maybe is not getting detoxified in another way. And that's where the saunas and like hot yoga and those kinds of things can play a role.
Okay. Yeah, those are some great tips. I love it. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of wrap up here and I want to share your website and how people can work with you and get some resources from you. So why don't you give us the whole lowdown?
Yeah, sure. So it's just my name is my website, rishmawalji.com. We can link to it, I guess, in the
Yes.
bottom so people can spell it. So rishmawalji.com is my website. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and, social media is a great way to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with people who reach out. And then I have a bunch of links for free resources. If anyone's interested in fertility or hormonal balance, I have some free resources as well. And then also some courses on my website as well if people want more detailed information on whether it's healthy eating, hormonal balance, fertility, they can certainly reach out.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll share a bunch of links under the Facebook, and then you work locally in Toronto. I was just learning from our recent guest. It sounds like you have to see someone who you could see someone online, but they have to be in your province. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different regulations depending on where you practice. So to be honest, my clinical practice is quite busy. So right now I'm putting out a lot of just educational resources for
Okay.
people.
Gotcha. So you want
But certainly if anyone's local, I'm just outside of Toronto actually, but if anyone's local and they are specifically, a good match for my expertise or something like that, then I'm happy to have a conversation with them and see if it would be a good fit.
okay. What suburb are you in?
I'm in Milton.
Milton. I don't know
Yeah.
where that is. My family lives in Pickering, some of them.
Okay, that's the other side of Toronto.
Oh, okay. Good to know. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really
Oh,
enjoyed
thanks for having
meeting
me.
you. And yeah, I hope, we all need reminders sometimes on our drinking our water and, are we eating our vegetables? So it's really a really great reminder. And hopefully people got some sense of how to navigate the 40s a little easier. If you want to go deeper again, we'll have the links below. So thanks again,
Perfect.
Rishma.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a good one.